Hello, my friends. This is Deepak Chopra again, and we are continuing our series of conversations with luminaries and influencers in every aspect of life, but always focusing on the future of well being, personal well being, social well being, planetary well being. So it's my great pleasure today to welcome to our conversation a luminary and influencer in integrative medicine, but in all things that have to do with consciousness as well. She's a cardiologist, an internist, and a very good friend of mine. Please welcome Mimi Guarneri, who's a prolific writer, author, and influencer, but also one of the most influential people on the planet as far as integrative medicine is concerned. Integrative medicine, integrative health, integrative well being, whatever we want to call it. So, thank you for joining me, Mimi.
It's great to be here, Deepak. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So the way I start these conversations is ask a little bit. We have a lot of influencers on these conversations, including physicists, Nobel laureates, physicians, cosmologists, but we always come back to well-being. And I want to start this conversation with you just by asking you to share with our audience. We will be reaching about 15 million people in the next few weeks. So it's very important that they know who you are. Some of them don't know who you are, and a lot of them don't know who I am, but they somehow filter to our sites. So please tell us a little bit about where you grew up, your education, why did you go to medical school, and how did you end up being where you are? Briefly.
Very briefly, okay, so here you go, 60 years and 25 seconds.
No,
Deepak,
no, take 2 3 minutes.
that's good. I grew up in Brooklyn in a very strong Italian enclave of a lot of extended family. And, I have an affinity for India, which I think you know, and I always call my friends in India the Italians of the East. So I grew up with a very strong, connected family and aunts and grandma and everyone living in the same house. My mom died at a very young age. She died at the age of 40 and of cardiovascular disease. And I think that really shaped who I am at this point because it really taught me what was important in life, which is people and love. And those are the things that matter the most. So that really propelled me to go to medical school. But I have to say, when I went into medical school, I wasn't thinking about well being. I was thinking about everything I can do to fix broken hearts. I wanted to be a cardiologist from day one. And I thought that meant things like stents and angioplasty and surgery. And, 1994, I did over 700 stents a year. I was putting stents in and doing procedures. And then all of a sudden, one day I met a guy named Dean Ornish, who you know very well. And Dean said to me, why don't we teach some of these heart patients yoga and meditation, put them on a vegetarian diet? And I thought, oh, that's kind of crazy. I didn't learn that in medical school. And that really propelled me in a whole new direction. And then I met Rowney King, and I was trained in healing touch. And then I discovered acupuncture and transcendental meditation. And the list goes on and on to where it really transformed not only my personal life, but all of the people that I touch. It's really about, yes, I could do the Western medicine side, but I'm a firm believer in the lifestyle medicine side and a firm believer in the power of meditation. I love that you have your total meditation book out and really teaching people to change their consciousness, which no one teaches better than you.
So I'm speaking to Dr. Mimi Guarneri, cardiologist, integrative health specialist, and actually, you are still the head of the global. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I'm president of the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, and our whole focus is to change the way clinicians think, how they practice medicine. So, when we went to medical school, we were taught, tell me you're ill and I'll give you a pill, this ill to the pill thinking. And of course, what we now know is that we need to get to the underlying cause of all of these health challenges that people have. And what we do with the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine is we give clinicians the information, the data, everything they need to think about people and life differently. What's going on with nutrition? What's going on in someone's community? How does the planet's health affect our health? How does stress make us sick? How does, meditation transform our telomeres? All of these things, which are fundamentally important and no one teaches in medical school.
So once again, maybe that's very important. Can we have the full name of the organization and the website, which we'll put anyway? But I encourage everyone listening to us to check out the Academy.
Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine. It's A as in Apple, I as in India, H as in holistic, M as in medicine, AIHM.org. And you can go there also and find a clinician that thinks this way, someone who's trained beyond just the Western medical school training.
So my friends, we'll have the link to this site and check it out. And, if you're looking for an integrative health practitioner, it'll make it easier for you. And I hope actually with your permission, sometime we can put you on our foundation website as well, so we can help people find the right people.
That would be great.
Practitioner. So we'll do that. So Mimi, now let's talk about cardiology first, because I have a close relationship with cardiologists, and that began with my father. So, my father was a cardiologist. He trained in England at the Royal Heart Hospital, and he was also actually a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, but for a short period he was consultant to the royal family in England, and we are talking long time ago in the 50s. And then he returned to India, and he became a professor at Armed Forces Medical School of Medicine and Cardiology. So in 1959, I believe, there was a war going on between India and China. And my father was an adventurer, we used to call him Sir Chopra. And he landed a plane in Leh, which is the capital of Tibet, or was the capital of Tibet, along with a couple of other people. And while people were shooting each other across the border, Chinese and Indians, there were also a lot of soldiers that were coming down with high altitude mountain pulmonary edema and pulmonary hypertension. And he happened to be doing catheterization up at that height, 20,000 feet. Cardiac cath was one of the first people to describe high altitude pulmonary hypertension and pulmonary edema. And of course, that now is a whole discipline. And he came back ultimately as a cardiologist, always his love. But I introduced him to Ayurveda when I left my traditional, training. I continued to maintain my license in California, etc., in Massachusetts. But when I introduced him to Ayurveda, he was totally kind of against my whole foray into this area. It was so different from his training. But then he ended up being one of the biggest exponents of spirituality, consciousness, Ayurveda, and became actually a Vedantist. So my relationship with my father, and of course with my mother, who was a great storyteller, influenced my entire childhood. I remember my father coming from hospital, and they used to pray together. My parents, for the patients on Sundays. My father would see patients free of charge. My mother would prepare food for them, and when they went, when they left. They would come from all over the country, by the way, to see my dad in this small city in Jabalpur, India, where Maharishi came from, by the way, my guru. And then my mother would make sure that the patients had enough money for their bus or their train when they went home. So not only did they see the patients, they prepared food for them, they paid for their bus and train fare, and they prayed for them. And my memories, daddy coming home and talking about a patient, and my mother saying, who was not a college graduate, by the way, she went only to high school. My mother saying to him, Daddy, did you check him for atrial fibrillation? Did you check him for PAT? Things like that she had learned. But they both knew that the heart is not just a pump, that the heart has more to it than the pump. So tell me about a broken heart. What is a broken heart?
Oh, that's a great question. A number of years ago, I wrote a book called The Heart Speaks. And the reason I titled it The Heart Speaks is because I had a patient who every time he would have a cardiac issue would not call and say to me, oh, my heart is having an issue. He'd say, my heart is speaking to me. And I would ask him, what's going on in your life? What is happening right now? And one of the things I never learned in medical school was the connection between the emotional heart, the mental heart, the spiritual heart, and the physical heart. I was only taught about the physical heart. And after doing research with Ornish for many, many years and working with patients with coronary disease, really sick people, and I began to realize that people's biography is their biology. When I started to really listen to people's stories and talking about what has happened in their life, where they feel like they've been hurt or disconnected or emotionally upset, I started to learn about the heart on a whole different level. It's not really about coronary artery disease. I have patients who have such bad coronary disease that they never have a problem. And a lot of that is because they are connected to bigger things in their life. They have a purpose in life. They have joy in their life. So to me, these became fundamentally important in trying to get people to reach deeper for those things and not just focus on, oh, what is my cholesterol and so on. So broken heart has been now recognized in cardiology, believe it or not, as an actual syndrome. They even have a name for it, Takotsubo Cardiomyopathy, where people literally, after hearing bad news or have a shock, an emotional shock, the heart muscle gets very weak, and it almost looks like that person might need a heart transplant. It's more common in women. And we really
What's the
believe,
name again? What's the
yeah, Takotsubo Cardiomyopathy.
Takotsubo, named after
Yeah,
a
they
Japanese
named it, right. Believe it or not, it now has an official medical name and something we've known for years and years. And so we believe it's related to the heart sustaining a big rush of stress hormones, of adrenaline, noradrenaline, aldosterone. These are all the hormones that make the heart weak. And most of the time it's in women, and most people recover. That's the good news. But it's recognized now.
Okay, so you spoke about the physical heart, the emotional heart, and you said spiritual heart.
Right.
Okay, so what's the spiritual heart?
Now, well, for me, that's what are we connected to? I have an avatar, a spiritual teacher in Southern India as well, Sri Narayaniyama. And when I began to look at some of the spiritual principles with my heart patients, what really matters the most, what brings us joy, what is our purpose, service, all of these things. I realized that these are all important for the heart on a much deeper level than just taking a drug. And a lot of these principles, even though I was raised in a fairly Catholic family, It wasn't until I started to go to India and really learn about spirituality in a different way. When I grew up, I was taught about the Sacred Heart, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, for example, in a Catholic household. And now I look at the heart as much, much more than just a pump.
So, as you know, in the traditions of Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism and non-duality and Sankhya, and basically not only the Vedantic traditions, but Buddhism and Jainism and many of the Eastern wisdom traditions, but particularly in Ayurveda and Vedanta, we speak about three bodies: the physical body, the subtle body, and the causal body. Physical body, of course, everybody talks about, is this process that begins with a fertilized ovum and ends with dusty death in between everything else, zygote and embryo and baby and toddler and teenager. So the physical body is considered in Vedanta, at least Kashmir Shaivism, the biggest illusion. And that includes the physical heart and the physical brain. They're all perceptual activities in consciousness. And so the physical body is a passing illusion. But then there's a subtle body, which is divided into manomaya kosha, which is the mind, then the intellect, frequently referred to as jnana maya kosha, and then the ego, ahankar. So in that subtle body, the subtle body, manomaya kosha, mano means mind, maya in this case means full of, and kosha means layer, sheath in Sanskrit. So manomaya kosha is part of the subtle body, and it's principally the emotional body. And a lot of Buddhists and a lot of people that I work with in these traditions, they refer to the physical body as an expression of the karmic body. The karmic body being the internal dialogue, which is emotional, not just the intellect. The intellectual is separate. Okay, so the emotional internal dialogue is the karmic body. If I close my eyes and I think of all my relationships, my mother, my dad, you, my children, my wife, my significant friends, just I have to think of them, and there's an emotion that is linked. Okay, so there's an emotion linked to my kids, emotion linked to my wife, emotion linked to the world, etc. As soon as I think of them, I have some experience in the subtle body. So my body is actually a rainbow of emotions that are my internal dialogue, and my body is constantly responding to that, and it's called the karmic body. It's called the karmic body. Exactly what you said. Okay, it's the result of past experiences. In fact, in Vedanta, there's an expression: if you want to know what your experiences were in the past, which means karma, really, or how we interpreted them. If you want to know what your experiences were in the past, look at your body now. If you want to know what your body will look like in the future, then choose your experiences now consciously. And so basically, by changing karma, you change the body, and you change karma either by being a witness to it, just a witness to it, no evaluation, or by transcending it through meditation, or through upgrading it by love and service, or karma yoga. So that's how you cure the karmic body. And then you're ready for the spiritual body, which is the causal body, which is Jivatma and Brahman and all the way through. So what you're saying is so important, but I think because you're a cardiologist and you're now speaking so clearly about the broken heart, can you tell us if the heart has neurons? Can we think of the heart as a brain as well? Can we think of the heart having its mind? Can we think of the heart with its pacemaker and automaticity, that organ which sets the pacemaker for everything else, our brain cells? Every cell in our bodies has electrical activity, but this particular pacemaker, which has 100 cells firing together, I believe it's a non-local interaction of cardiac neurons, if you want to call them that, the cardiac neurons that come together as the pacemaker. And this pacemaker, and I'm saying this from an intuitive level, I don't have any knowledge of this, but I'm saying this from my interaction with the great Vedantists and scholars and Ayurvedic physicians, that it's the heart that sends the pacemaker of the rest of the body. The brain follows the heart. So do the cells in the body follow the heart, that the heart is the master oscillator. You can take it out, put it in a culture medium, and it'll beat by itself, right? So give me the science for emotional heart.
This is great. Well, I want to add one thing to the karmic discussion. The easy way I teach it to my patients without having to make it too complicated or even talking about karma or consciousness is I just teach them right thoughts, right deeds, right actions. Right. And that's if we can live our life by that simple principle, right, we're setting ourselves up for nothing but good karma. And I think for many of my patients, just that concept is an easy way to grasp it. Well, there's a lot of research on the heart, and it's fascinating. So I'm just going to tell one study that I love, which has been done by the Heart Math Institute. And they take people and they put them in front of a computer and they flash pictures in front of them. And what's fascinating about it is some of the pictures are really, neutral, nothing. You look at it, you say, hey, that's nice. Some are really disturbing. And what they found through their research, hooking people up to heart rate variability monitors and so on, that even before the negative picture gets flashed, the heart rate variability changes. The heart already knew what that photo was going to show before it's put up, which is fascinating when you think about it, right? And now we also know, of course, that the heart has, as you said, if you look at the embryo, the heart starts pumping early on, and that sets the pacemaker, as we say, for the rest of the human body to be formed. And we also know that the heart is connected to the brain through many nerves, including the big vagus nerve. So the heart responds first. We never say, oh, I love with my brain, I feel with my heart, I love with my heart. We use all of these cliches, including broken heart, and we never use the brain for any of those. So we know the heart has a nervous system. As you said, you can take it out and it paces. We know broken heart syndrome is real, and it's related to an outpouring of adrenaline and noradrenaline. And we know that the heart intuitively responds before the brain. And this has been shown in very interesting research. And of course, if you read Paul Pearsall's work, the Heart's Code, for example, which I find absolutely fascinating about heart transplant patients who take on characteristics of the person who donated the heart and not even knowing that person, right? You have vegetarians becoming non-vegetarians, and the list goes on, and people knowing all about someone else's life when they've never even met the family or the individual of the donor. Right. And so I think Paul Pearsall's work in this area is absolutely fascinating.
So let me share with you a couple of insights based on what you just said. Okay. So, the heart knows before you know intellectually. That's what you're saying. Intuitively, the heart knows before. Now, there are other people, including, physicists and others who use that argument with the brain as well, based on Libet's work, that the brain responds to intention before you consciously are aware of the intention. The brain responds to intention before you're consciously aware. And now you're saying the heart does too, not only to intention, but to insight. So, I went back to my teachings from Maharishi and all these other great people because some of the brain scientists use the argument, Libet's argument, as an argument against free will. They say if the brain already knows what you're going to decide, then there's no free will. It's an illusion. This is the mechanistic worldview, and most of the physicists also use that. In fact, I just interviewed Frank Wilczek, who won the Nobel Prize in physics, and he uses that argument to actually discount free will. But then elsewhere in the book, his book, which I have in my hand right now somewhere, which is brilliant, by the way, it's called Fundamentals of Reality, and it's all about physics. Elsewhere, he talks about the complementarity between free will and determinism. So, what Maharishi or my great teachers, gurus would say, that they both exist. Karmically speaking, is you're deterministic. But when you become awake, when you wake up, you have choice. So both simultaneously exist, the karmic body and the enlightened body, which is also called the bliss body or the rainbow body or whatever. They both simultaneously exist. Now, the argument for that is very interesting, and I want to share it with you. So nobody talks about this in standard biology or science or neuroscience or even cardiology, as far as I am aware. Maybe you know more. But in the Vedanta, in the yogic traditions, thought emerges in 4 stages. Every thought, every emotion, 4 stages. The first is called para. Para means you have the intention, but you're not consciously aware of it. Para means beyond. Para means beyond. So para is you have the intention. I'm going to call my brother later this afternoon, but actually I'm not even aware of it. But my mind, my consciousness is already thinking of that. Para. Pashyanti is the second stage. It's a cloud of probabilities, a cloud of probabilities. Second stage. Third stage, so para pashyanti, third stage is madhyama. Now it's my internal dialogue. Now I actually am aware of it. And then vekhari, speech and action. So every thought goes through those 4 stages. Now, if you think about this, and we have to be careful because I annoy a lot of my scientist friends, is these 4 stages is exactly how consciousness ultimately results in collapse of the wave function. First, consciousness is field of infinite probabilities, infinite. Mm-hmm. Then it becomes a probability field based on karma, right? And then you hear the internal dialogue and then you act it out, and that's the karmic body. So there is no argument against free will. Free will is just a choice on waking up from the dream, the Maya that we call everyday reality. So what you're saying about the intuitive heart is probably even preceding the intuitive brain and ultimately preceding everything, because this body is nothing other than modified consciousness. It's not energy, it's not information, it's not matter. It is consciousness modifying itself as energy, information, and matter.
Right. And it's a hard concept for a lot of people to grasp unless you've had that transcendental experience where you start to realize that there's something more. Right. And that's one of our goals, is through teaching meditation, is to have people connect, whether it's through chanting, through meditation, through pranayama, so they can start to make the connection that yes, this is this physical body, but that this is not all there is. Yeah.
So ever since I changed my mind to believing that my body is made out of consciousness, it became very easy for me to change my body. it also then made sense that telomerase goes up. It made sense that chanting and meditation and pranayam stimulates the vagus nerve. These are all the
Exactly.
corresponding effects. So I no longer think of the body as a physical body or an energetic body, although energy is close to it. But energy also is modified consciousness.
And you know where I first read this, and it was fascinating to me, was when I read Autobiography of a Yogi, when I read Yogananda's book. And there's one section in the book where Yogananda is talking about changing his physical body. And I thought, wow, is that really, and this was years ago. And of course, if you, I know you've read the book, but if anyone hasn't, it's not a book, right? It's a transmission. I mean, it's such a powerful transmission. And I remember reading that and starting to teach to my patients that if they thought in this way, they don't have to worry about losing weight. They just have to, to connect to that, and it will happen. And that's where I learned about it first.
This is what happened to me. And then I found out everything about the polyvagal theory and how chanting and breathing and pranayam and praying and all these things that we do every day as part of our sadhana are actually changing not only my physical body, but my perception of what we call the world. It's so weird once you start to experience it, and then the science comes along and says, yeah, we can explain this.
Right. So we said for years, the mysticism deserves a mechanism,
Right.
right? Science is lagging behind. I mean, I do Kundalini yoga, and
Correct.
Kundalini yoga is, there's a
Lot of
lot of
animals.
pranayam, and it's like having a healing touch session for an hour every time, right? So this has been studied in the yogic sciences. This has been out there for a very, very long time. It's only Western medicine that's lagging in having a way to measure it and understand it. I mean, there was so much excitement with the Buddha brain, right? Putting people in the MRI and trying to understand how is the brain different in someone who's a deep meditator. And, these are things that we've seen and known for years. It's just we haven't had the science through the lens of science, like looking at telomeres and telomerase. Now we're starting to have some things that allow us to put a mechanism on this ancient wisdom.
So, Mimi, it's been such a great pleasure to have this conversation with you. And, this kind of conversation expands everyone's awareness. And I think the sooner we put the physical heart, the emotional heart, and the spiritual heart all as one unified activity in consciousness, we will have the emergence of a new future for well-being, because everything you've said is measurable now. We can, we are also part of our research right now at the Chopra Foundation is regarding what we call well-fees instead of selfies. So you can take a 10-second video, look at facial micro-expressions, tone of voice, eye movements, body language, and correlate that with blood pressure, heart rate variability, skin resistance, immune function. And I want to share this research with you, but also see if you want to collaborate in some of this so we can actually create a new paradigm for the future of well-being.
We would love to do it because we totally are on board with this thinking.
Okay, so I'd like to, if